Bertie the Beetle's Big Adventure. Once upon a time, in a garden so small you could cross it in 3 hops and a skip, there lived a young beetle named Bertie. Now, Bertie was a handsome little fellow, shiny as a polished button, with a shell as green as spring grass and 6 legs that wiggled when he walked. But there was one small problem. Bertie had only hatched 3 weeks ago, which meant he knew about as much about the world as a fish knows about climbing trees. Bertie's mother had tried to teach him important things, like which leaves were tastiest, how to avoid being stepped on, and most importantly, which creatures were dangerous. But Bertie, like many young beetles who think they know everything, had spent most of these lessons daydreaming about adventures instead of paying attention. One bright morning, when the sun was warming the garden stones and the dew still sparkled on the grass, Bertie decided to take a stroll. He climbed up a tall dandelion to get a better view of his kingdom. "What a magnificent world," he declared to no one in particular, puffing out his tiny chest with pride. But just as he reached the very top of the dandelion, a great gust of wind came swooping through the garden like an invisible giant taking a deep breath. The dandelion bent, swayed, and suddenly, whoosh! Bertie was swept right off his perch and sent tumbling through the air like a tiny green marble. Whoa! Help! This is actually quite exciting. No, wait, help! Bertie shouted as he spun and twirled through the sky. He flew over fences and hedges, past trees and rooftops, his little legs flailing uselessly in the air. Finally, after what felt like hours but was really only a minute or 2, he landed with a soft plop in a pile of hay. Bertie lay there for a moment, dizzy and confused, his shell slightly askew and his antennae pointing in different directions. When his head stopped spinning, he looked around and realized he was in a completely unfamiliar place. Instead of his cozy little garden, he found himself in the middle of a large country farm. There was a red barn in the distance, a wooden fence stretching as far as he could see, and everything smelled different, like earth and animals and fresh grass. "Oh, dear," Bertie said to himself, straightening his shell. "I'm not in the garden anymore. Mother's going to be so worried. I'd better find my way home quickly." He climbed down from the hay pile and started walking across the farmyard, his tiny legs carrying him as fast as they could, which, to be honest, wasn't very fast at all. He was just beginning to think he might make it across safely when suddenly, thud, 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 enormous footsteps shook the ground beneath him. Bertie looked up, and his little beetle jaw dropped open in terror. Standing before him was the biggest creature he'd ever seen, a massive cow with a body like a small mountain, legs like tree trunks, and a face so far above him that Bertie had to crane his neck back until it hurt. "Oh no, a monster," Bertie squeaked, and he immediately dove behind a pebble, his heart beating so fast it felt like a tiny drum was playing inside his shell. "This is it. I'm going to be eaten. I'm far too young to be somebody's breakfast." The cow, whose name was Bessie, looked down with her big, gentle brown eyes. She had absolutely no interest in eating beetles. She much preferred grass and clover and the occasional bucket of grain. She stared at the spot where Bertie was hiding for exactly 2 seconds, chewed her cud thoughtfully, and then turned away with complete indifference. Grass," she said to herself in a deep, rumbling voice, and wandered off toward a fresh patch by the fence. Bertie peeked out from behind his pebble, trembling from antennae to back legs. Did she see me? She must have, but she didn't eat me. Maybe she's not hungry? Or maybe I'm too small for her to bother with. Yes, that must be it. I'm simply beneath the notice of such a large beast. He felt a tiny bit proud of himself for surviving his first encounter with a farm animal. Taking a deep breath to steady his nerves, Bertie continued on his way across the farmyard. He had only gone a few steps when he heard a new sound, a jingling collar and panting breath. Before he knew what was happening, a large dog came bounding into view, his floppy ears flying and his tail wagging like a happy flag. Another monster, Bertie shrieked. And this time he ran as fast as his little legs could carry him, which looked rather like a frantic wiggle. He scrambled toward a crack in the dirt, ready to dive for safety. The dog, whose name was Buster, stopped and tilted his head, looking at the tiny beetles scurrying across the ground. Buster didn't eat insects. They tasted terrible and made him sneeze. He was much more interested in chasing balls, getting belly rubs, and especially in chasing the farm cat, who he'd just spotted sitting on the fence washing her whiskers. Cat! Buster barked joyfully, completely forgetting about Bertie. He took off like a shot, racing toward the fence with his tongue hanging out and his tail going wild. Bertie, who had just reached his hiding spot, peeked out and saw the enormous dog running away at top speed. His eyes grew wide with amazement. "Well, would you look at that?" Bertie said, his voice full of wonder. "That big scary dog took one look at me and ran away. I must be tougher than I thought. Maybe I'm actually quite fierce looking. Yes, that must be it. I probably have a very intimidating expression." He tried to make an intimidating face, which mostly just made him look like he needed a sneeze. Feeling much braver now, Bertie strutted across the farmyard with his head held high and his antennae pointed proudly forward. "I'm Bertie the Brave," he announced to a nearby stone. "Bertie the Bold. Bertie the big and scary." He hadn't gone far when he came across a very large bird with a red, wobbly thing hanging from its face and feathers that puffed out like a fancy pillow. It was a turkey, and her name was Gertrude, though everyone just called her Trudy. Bertie stopped in his tracks. "Ah, another beast," he said, but this time with much less fear. "Well, let's see what this one does when it meets Bertie the Fierce." He stood right in the turkey's path and puffed himself up as much as a beetle can puff, which honestly wasn't very much at all. The turkey walked straight toward him, her beady eyes focused on something in the distance. "Ahem, ahem," Bertie said loudly. "I'm standing here, a dangerous beetle. You should probably be scared now." The turkey walked right past him, without so much as a glance. She was completely focused on a pile of corn that had spilled near the barn, and nothing in the world was more important to her than corn. Not beetles, not warnings, not anything. She gobbled and pecked at the corn, making happy turkey noises. Bertie stared after her, his confidence growing even more. Well, she was so frightened that she couldn't even look at me. She just hurried right past. My reputation must be spreading already. He polished his shell proudly with one leg. Feeling absolutely certain now that he was the toughest creature on the farm, Bertie continued his journey. As he rounded the corner of the barn, he came upon a chicken surrounded by a fluffy crowd of baby chicks. The chicks were peeping and chirping, tumbling over each other like little balls of fluff. "Good morning," Bertie called out cheerfully. "Don't worry, I'm just passing through. No need to be alarmed by my fearsome presence." The mother hen, whose name was Henrietta, glanced down at him for barely a second. But she wasn't thinking about beetles at all. She was watching the sky for hawks, keeping her eye on the farm cat, and counting her chicks to make sure all 12 were accounted for. A little beetle was the absolute last thing on her mind. "Cluck, cluck," she said to her babies. "Stay close to Mama. Don't wander off." She herded her chicks in the opposite direction, entirely focused on her maternal duties. "There you have it," Bertie said, watching them go. "Even mother hens flee from me. I must admit, I'm rather impressed with myself. You know, I think I was wrong to be scared earlier. These big creatures, these cows and dogs and turkeys and chickens, they're all quite harmless. They're probably more afraid of me than I am of them. In fact, I don't know what Mother was so worried about. The world is perfectly safe." He walked on with a swagger, humming a little tune he made up on the spot. Bertie the Beetle, so brave and so bright, all the big animals run off in fright. Now, dear listener, this is where our story takes an important turn. Because while Bertie was feeling very pleased with himself and very confident indeed, he had made a rather serious mistake. You see, he had learned exactly the wrong lesson. None of those animals had run away because they were scared. They simply didn't eat beetles. But Bertie didn't know that, and his head had grown as big as a pumpkin with pride. Just then, as Bertie strutted across an open patch of ground near the barn, a shadow passed over him. If Bertie had been paying attention, if he'd remembered his mother's warnings, he might have looked up. He might have noticed a small bird circling above, a sparrow with sharp eyes and a hungry belly. He might have hidden or run, or at least been careful. But Bertie was too busy feeling proud to pay attention to shadows. The sparrow, whose name doesn't really matter because he's only in the story for a moment, had been watching Bertie for quite some time. Unlike cows who eat grass, or dogs who chase cats, or turkeys who love corn, or chickens who protect their babies, the sparrow ate exactly one thing for his breakfast: insects. And a plump, shiny, green beetle strutting across the open ground was absolutely perfect. The sparrow swooped down, silent as a whisper. Bertie heard a soft whoosh of feathers and finally, looked up, but it was far too late. His eyes went wide as dinner plates. "Oh," he said in a very small voice. "Oh, dear." And in one quick snap, the sparrow scooped up Bertie in his beak and flew off toward a tree branch to enjoy his breakfast. Now, you might think that's a sad ending, but remember, this is a story with a lesson. And the lesson is this: never underestimate danger, especially when things seem safe. The world is full of surprises, and the smallest threat can be the most dangerous one. You see, Bertie made a big mistake. He thought that because the big animals didn't hurt him, all animals were harmless. He became overconfident and careless. He forgot to stay alert and cautious. And most importantly, he forgot that danger doesn't always come the size you expect. And so, remember Bertie the Beetle whenever you feel too sure of yourself. Stay careful, stay watchful, and never assume you know everything about the world, because the world is full of surprises, big and small. The end.